Very good. Thank you, Mr. Kadani. Director Kadani, the question that I asked Mr. Ramos, are the people that were involved in that negotiations that did the contract or part of the time frame that we're discussing when the contract was being negotiated with all of the issues that should have been flushed out, are they still working on this project or in your department?
Some are. The previous project director is no longer with us, but some of the technical expertise that the department and Caltech depends on, quite honestly, is still with us and serving as well.
I'm more concerned with the decision makers, those that did it and were of authority.
That position has been morphed. I've taken a very hands-on role since my arrival as chief deputy in 2012. So that decision maker position is actually better utilized for the additional horsepower and expertise that this project needs.
Great, thank you. Chair Bonilla?
Thank you for that clarification, because I do think it's important on the timeline to understand to some degree this landed in your lap. You weren't there at the inception of the process, so I think that's important. I do think, though, that one of the questions that remains, and one reason we focused on this latest amendment, is has the culture changed?
Yes.
Well, the concern is that with the lack of being forthcoming on this latest amendment, that maybe it hasn't changed, and I don't have enough time to even maybe describe the culture that has existed to allow all of these this lack of proactive and aggressive and decision making to occur, but not being forthcoming and transparent when you had every opportunity in the middle of an audit or at the end of an audit, and you're still going to be under review every 60 days.
Yeah.
That's why we focus so much on this, and that's why it's so very, very troubling, is we simply cannot turn a blind eye if to the fact that perhaps there is not a deep enough understanding of just how serious this situation is, just how much the public demands and requires answers. And I appreciate that, there's a sacrificial lamb here or there that perhaps isn't working with us anymore. But this is a massive leadership issue. This is not some project manager at all. We cannot lay this at the feet of one or two IT people or whatever. This is clearly a leadership issue in both of the affected departments and DGS as well, back from the beginning. And the timeline shows that. So I don't know that that's a question or just a statement here, but I really feel that one of the things we need back is assurance. More than assurance, we need to actually have demonstrated, change of process and leadership and all of those factors as well. And then I want to focus in on the costs that you've talked about. So here's the ultimate, insult added to enormous injury. Now we're going to pay Accenture because we're actually trying to do the right thing. So we're going to pay them more while we're pausing it. And the cost of the delay, which I understand, and there's some debate, I understand about what that cost is. Please illuminate us as to what the real cost is, the role of DCA in negotiating a lower cost for the delay. And how about if we bring Accenture back, that any future contracts make them absorb that cost?
The latter, notwithstanding my own personal view, the latter I could not control. If what happens in a future contract negotiation is essentially negotiated and up to those parties.
That was just a rhetorical question.
I completely understand.
But to the cost, the actual one we're dealing with.
The actual cost, if I understand your question, Chair, is the cost of the delay of the special project report and the Section 11. That cost is determined by direct negotiations with my colleague, Mr. Ramos, and his department, and the vendor. Those started February 26th, shortly thereafter the delay, and Mr. Ramos was successful in getting a price, not a cost, which is completely different, a price per day or price per month towards the state until the end of March, I believe. The reason why I want to draw your attention on cost versus price is Price is negotiated. Cost is the direct cost that the vendor is incurring. And those are two different
Well,
things.
it's the price tag they put on their cost. I mean, whether they're incurring it or not, we don't know because we don't have any hourly breakdown, right, going forward?
We actually have that. We have the hourly breakdown of how much per person per hour it costs for them to be at DCA.
So what is the price?
The price is approximately 1.2 per month. The price for the delay is around 2.5 million.
And a quick question to the auditor on the process of this negotiation of the cost of the delay or the price of the delay. What is your, I mean, the number's been all over the map. I'm glad it's now a lot smaller than it was, but what's the process and what's your evaluation of this latest negotiation?
Well, this was an issue that the department brought to our attention when they responded to the report. The process we use when we draft an audit report, as I said in earlier comments, the agency has the written draft so that they can comment on that, and we publish that in the audit report. And this was an issue they raised. If we suspend or terminate, not terminate, but if we take a pause, it's going to be very costly. Our counterpoint to that is, and Mr. Porcher can assist me with this, is there is language that essentially requires Accenture to keep their costs at a minimum. It's not just, oh, these have been our costs up to this point, let's keep incurring those costs and the state's going to have to pay for that. They have a responsibility to keep their costs to a minimum. In addition to that, our staff, our departments need to keep their costs down as well while we're taking this pause. So we haven't seen the actual analysis, at least to my knowledge, we haven't seen it, but we're not convinced that that's what the actual cost would be for this pause. But I don't know if Mr. Porcher could expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, the only thing else that I could add is that the contract specifies that the state is not liable for any lost profits during one of these work stoppages. And the contractor does have a duty to mitigate costs. So that could mean things like reassigning people elsewhere or assigning them to other tasks that may or may not continue.
And here's the concern. Again, we had the concern about the amendment that wasn't actively or proactively revealed. And now I have another concern because the initial cost that went out there, and it was kind of like the house is burning, you know, when it was in budget committee, it's going to just be this outrageous cost. We have to go ahead. We have to do it. That's what's been driving the malfunction of this process from the beginning, that we are hostage to Accenture and we just have to keep spending money. We have to keep, you know, going after this. That's what troubles me when I talk about the culture or the mindset that seems to be so prevalent. Now you have the auditor coming in and putting brakes on and saying, whoa, actually, you can actually drive this down. Accenture actually has some obligations in this contractual relationship. And we need to know the mindset has changed and that the departments are going to be proactively representing the interests of our constituents and of the state.
Absolutely, the culture has changed. You know, we're not making knee-jerk reactions with regard to any decisions that have been made. The cost that we put out there with regard, it was worst-case scenario. It was in the event that Accenture decided.
Okay, can I just interrupt? You know, sometimes you use worst-case scenario to get legislators to do things
Sure.
for you, and that's not a really good policy to further in terms of a cultural shift.
The worst-case scenario we planned for in the event that the vendor, we had to know exactly what our liability would be in the event the vendor did not want to negotiate with the state. I needed that information in order to see what the state's exposure, both financial and programmatic, would be. That's where that number came from. Now that my colleague has been successful in negotiating with the vendor, we have a different number that is just tagged to that month. The end of March, that's when the number runs out. So the numbers are different, but it's different context. In terms of the culture, I would submit to this body that Everything that we have done since we have found the problems has been very deliberate, and we have done everything with the state's best interests in mind. Lessons learned from Release 1, giving the boards and bureaus the additional time they need in design, testing, more maintenance. We've listened to them, and we've engaged all of our control agencies on how we proceed.
Yeah, Assemblymember Dodd.
What, for DCA, DGS, IVB, and Caltech, what kind of support costs are they charging the boards and bureaus for this work that's been going on over the last 4 or 5 years?
What our costs are?
We pass on the cost of our providing resources to do IT project oversight. That amount it varies from year to year. That amount this year is $93.80 per month. There is an IV&V vendor that's a private contract, and I'd have to look up that amount to be able to tell you what that amount has been.
And is there an amount from DCA that is tagged just to this specific item in terms of support costs when you get involved and all your employees and everything get involved in the process?
The cost for the project is captured in Special Project Report 3.1. It's the cost of the project and how much it costs to run the project, inclusive of all the boards and bureaus that are part of that project.
Right. I'm not sure we're going to get to it. I mean, I've had this experience with Caltrans over time, and the amount that the support costs that they charge for each individual project, and it sounds to me like that's what you do, and I'm not getting any specifics, and maybe you just don't have that. But once again, what I'm concerned about is the boards and bureaus are going to be paying for this amount here, plus for all the support work that all the departments have been done that's been, frankly, less than stellar, and we're passing those costs on. And I guess, Mr. Chair, I don't know if there's any, provisions, for any other way of, allocating some of these costs. You know what that means? If it's not paid for here, it's going to be paid for somewhere else. But I don't know. I'm just really disappointed in the.
Well, I think then ultimately it would be the general fund, but that's not part of the equation in this. But the good thing that I heard today that I thought the director mentioned was that those bureaus and agencies and boards are not going to be responsible for those extended costs just for the infrastructure, the hardware, and the implementation early on, and that they're not going to be saddled with the additional costs later on. And I was encouraged to hear that today. The sad part is that now that will just make the cost for the earlier boards in Phase 1 and Phase 2 have to pay a lot more because for a failed system at the early on, and that's unfortunate. I wanted to welcome Senator Bates and Senator Wachowski, who are here. Thank you for joining us, and Assemblymember Chang, I know, was here earlier. I wanted to ask Mr. Ramos a question. Director Ramos, the auditor had indicated that, and my understanding, that your department has really total authority over IT projects that are now throughout the state. They come to you, you have the ability to monitor, you're responsible for making sure, this is to solve those historic problems that we've had where departments would go on their own and work through them without a lot of oversight, a lot of veto authority, a lot of ability to make changes, amendments early on to reduce costs and increase efficiency at the end of the day. Do you agree with what I think my understanding and the auditor's assumption is and understanding that authority is yours? And if it is yours, have you exercised that in this particular case and in others that you're working with?
So we do have oversight authority. We have the authority to approve projects. As of 2013, we have authority for IT project procurements and negotiating amendments to contracts. For the most part, there are some projects that still get exempted from our oversight, specifically those in the legislative branch, those in the judicial branch, and on occasion the legislature will exempt projects through statutory provisions from our oversight. we have the authority to implement a number of different corrective actions on projects, such as suspending or terminating projects. We do those with a lot of deliberation and a lot of, we do it selectively.
Have you terminated any projects?
We have, including the ones, the auditor mentioned in the other oversight audit, that there were 2 projects that she didn't feel we exercised our authority on. Those are 2 that one we suspended, the other one we terminated. So I don't agree that we don't exercise our authority appropriately or proactively. I think we do. We do work very proactively with departments, and I think even with Breeze, we worked with them early on to identify issues and try to address them. Now, as I mentioned, there were constraints that kept us from being able to come in and say, stop the project today. But I think we do actively engage and exercise our authority. Further, we've made a number of changes, and I know we're going to have a hearing later this week where we can go into great detail on those changes to the way we do things today that are much different than the way things were done in 2010 and 2011, which engage us much earlier and help address all of these issues that we've been finding. We've done our own review and our own assessments of projects that have gone well as well as the ones that have gone bad. We've documented lessons learned. We've implemented training programs. We've changed our processes. We were successful in getting procurement moved over here so that procurement of IT projects not only leverages the experience and the expertise of the technology folks over here, but also more tightly aligns procurement with IT project oversight so that you can begin risk mitigation at the procurement level. Yeah. That was one of our challenges with this project, right? Procurement was in an entirely different department. We've also implemented a number of efforts aimed at trying to bring expertise to departments when they don't have it. I think one of the things we haven't talked about here, but I think the department found itself challenged having experienced, savvy project managers or folks that had worked on whether it's the contracting side of it or the actual management and how you manage a vendor. So we've implemented a number of changes and brought resources to bear in that regard. But overall, I'd say that we do have authority and we do exercise it carefully and judiciously. And one last point that I would like to make, even with all those authorities, fundamentally, once a project is in flight, the interactions between the state and the contractor are governed by a contract. So I don't have the authority today to go in and say, okay, all the provisions of the contract are null and void, or we can set those aside because we want to do something different. Those have to be negotiated. So many of the changes that you see on, this particular contract or other contracts, have to be negotiated.
But the contract we're talking about and the changes that were necessary, are you overseeing the new contracts that would give you more flexibility, more ability to do and make those changes if they're necessary so that we're not tied to a problem contract as we are today?
We are, and in fact, the move to make those contracts more palatable to the state and more favorable came out of the direction of this department. It came out of our oversight activities that said, contracts we have in place today, one, they're all linked, so if you tube one of them, you tube them all and you kill the project. If we need to break them apart, we need to be able to come in and separate ourselves and give the state more management authority over the project and the contractor. So we do oversee those today.
And that's a new boilerplate language that hopefully is being included in those contracts that do provide the protection for the state.
Well, the boilerplate language that the auditors spoke about, those have been in place for a while. What happened is when the contract was initially approved, it was excluded. So there is, just to make the point, we work very closely with the Department of General Services on the general terms and conditions and specifically for IT. So, we're baking in the lessons that we've learned into the provisions of new contracts. So we do use boilerplate language. It is one that is negotiated and vetted through the vendor community so they know what's coming. We're in the process, and we can talk about this on Thursday, of implementing a vendor report card, essentially a performance report card, so that we can measure and track and then be able to defend our decisions in the future to award or take into account a vendor's performance when a bid comes through. That's in the draft stages, so it's not out yet, but that's something we'll be baking into our procurement process as well.
And one, do you feel that Breeze is currently getting back to the Breeze issue, providing the services and functionality that were guaranteed or were specified in phase one to those bureaus and boards?
I think in phase one, they missed the mark in terms of what the boards and bureaus needed. I think the system is in production and it is providing functionality. I think there are some amendments and some changes to the system that need to happen. Those are reflected in the proposal that's before the legislature in SPR 3.1 to bring that functionality that was missing initially. But that hasn't been executed yet. That's still to come. But it is in production and working, as Mr. Kidani said, at least for the initial 8 boards. You know, how well they like it. And frankly, here's the other thing that is, again, a best practice and something that needs to happen. When you buy an off-the-shelf system, you don't go in there and say, okay, we're going to buy an off-the-shelf system and then change it completely to the way we do business. You have to kind of modify the way you do business, your business operations. That's something that didn't happen necessarily on this project. That still needs to happen, not only for, you know, the boards in release 1, but release 2, and that's part of the planning effort that's going to go into release 3. So, you know, to be able to say for those release 3 boards and bureaus, will they be able to use the system? A good deal of that depends on how much are they willing to modify the way they do business to you know, accommodate the advantages of a technology system.
Was the Breeze system an anomaly in terms of an off-the-shelf system, or is that standard in state procurement?
The state has gone through different iterations of different, it goes back and forth. Some, you know, there's periods of time when everybody thinks buying off the shelf is the way to go. There's other times when, you know, it becomes evident that you really need to develop something from scratch. I wouldn't say it's an anomaly in that other departments have bought off the shelf systems. Fiscal is a good example of that. But it does bring with it a certain level of implications in terms of what you need to do as a department from an organizational perspective and from business practices perspective. You know, not one size always fits all, so there is a need to customize and in some cases configure a system, even an off-the-shelf system, to meet your needs. But I wouldn't say it's an anomaly for a department to come in and seek an off-the-shelf system.